Hi, my name's Samantha from Minerva and welcome to today's video. I've got a sew along for you today and it's Simplicity S9509. It's a hat sew along and I'm going to be making today version A. Now version A is a cap with some cute little ties at the back, which I think gives it a little vintage feel. This is a multi-size pattern for adults and children alike. And you have 4 designs to choose from. I particularly like that bucket hat too. That looks a great one to make next. So I've gone for a gingham and this is from the Minerva range to make it have that little bit of a summery feel. So before I get into today's sew along, I want to ask you one question. Have you joined the Minerva site? Have you created a profile and shared some of your makes with your fellow creatives? If not, what are you waiting for? It's free to join and create that profile and you can start sharing your makes and seeing what other people have been making over on minerva.com. It really makes me have so much more confidence in my sewing. So let's get into today's video. So the first thing I did when I got the pattern open was to determine my size. So I got a tape measure and I measured around the widest part of my head. I got the size here and then from that I determined how big my hat would be. So Simplicity S9509 is sewn using just 4 paper pattern pieces, which we're going to cut out in this video, and an elastic measuring piece. It's sewn on a conventional sewing machine and all tools will be listed below, and the materials and their quantities. As you can see on the back of the pattern, there's just one material quantity for each one, which is why measuring is so important. So you need your pattern, your fabric, your lining, your thread, your buckram, your viling, and also your elastic. So here I am washing my fabric out and giving it a quick iron before we start the project. So let's open up the Simplicity pattern and have a look what's inside. First thing I'm going to do is determine my size. So there is a size chart on the back of the packet and I am a size large. So I'm going to be cutting out a large hat. So we've got the 2 instructions here. They're black and white and they have got some great diagrams on to make them really easy to follow. We also have our paper pattern. So I'm going to be cutting out the large pieces here to make the hat. And we're just going to have a little bit more of a detailed look at those instructions. So as you can see on the front, you've got all of your pattern pieces, you've got little diagrams at the front, and you've got a full sheet here for your hat A. And the final piece here is just on the second page. And we will need pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 3, and finally the ties pattern 5. So I cut out my tracing pattern and I laid it out on the fabric as the instructions, and we're going to be cutting out 2 of everything here apart from pattern 3. I then cut out everything and I took the pattern pieces and I cut out viling for pieces 1 and 2 once they all were tailor tacked on. So then I made sure that I had notched all of my pieces. Now I notch by cutting a little half V into my pieces and then I can accurately check them as I put the piece together in the sew along. And then I put my tailor tacks on. Now for me, tailor tacks are so important because I'm using a contrast thread here and I am stitching over the round circle of my pattern. And I know that when I start to sew this, that I will be able to accurately find where to put the pieces together. So I am tailor tacking through all of my pieces, and then once my tailor tacks are in, I will snip them open so I've got accurately 2 pieces with exactly the same tailor tack in a contrast thread. We're then going to put a tailor tack in the middle of pattern 1. Now this, I have taken the point of where the tailor tack is and opened up the piece, put the tailor tack in, and then snipped it off, because as I open that out, that'll give me the reference for where my tailor tack should be. Then I took all of my pieces off the fabric. And then I use my pieces 1 and 3 for cutting out the lining. So here I am cutting out the lining. So this was quite convenient that I could cut this one on a fold, and I cut piece 3 out too. So I'll be needing these pieces for the next stage in making the cap. So we're taking piece 2, our buckram, some scissors, and a pencil. I traced it out and I cut out my buckram. Don't worry if there's a crease in your buckram like there was in mine, because you won't see that once it's pressed and it's in your cap. I was really pleased with my peak. And then we take pieces 3, we take the lining and we take the gingham, and we put them wrong sides together, pin across the bottom, and take them to the machine and stitch along. Once we've stitched along the edge, we can trim and press this out. So here we have the seam and it's pressed out and trimmed. We're going to fold it over on itself so we can start to make the casing for our elastic. I am going to pin around the edge of pieces 3 so that they are together, making sure that my tailor tack, as you can see here at the top, is together and is at the top of my piece. So then we're going to take this and we're going to pop it at the machine with our lightweight elastic. So the first thing I did was I got my elastic and I measured it, because I wanted my casing for the elastic to fit perfectly. Once I did this, I stitched a casing for it on the machine, and then I took my elastic and my paper pattern, found the large one because I'm making the large pattern hat here, and I measured it just with the elastic as it relaxed. So we didn't stretch the elastic and we cut it in its relaxed form here, so we could then guide this through the channel. So I took a safety pin here and I started to thread my piece of elastic through the casing that I had created. I threaded this through, and once threaded both ends, we then put a pin on one side, took it through to the other side, and we took the safety pin out and we put a pin out. I actually would recommend on this process to maybe put a couple of pins in, because you don't want to spend the hard work threading through your elastic for it to pop out or come undone. So we pin that on both sides, and we then had our elastic in the bottom, and I then stitched this in place to make sure that it was nice and secure. And then we've got our peak. So I've got my peak here. I've got filing already on one side of my peak, and I've got my buckram here. Now my buckram needs to be tacked on, so I'm using quite a big needle here and a contrast thread. And I tacked this on. So I'm tacking my buckram here to just one piece of my peak. And once I'd tacked it on, I trimmed it. So I had a centimetre selvage round the edge so that I had enough space to stitch my peak pieces together on the sewing machine. So once I had my piece tacked on, I took the other piece and, making sure that my tailor tacks and my notches all matched up, I pinned them together, and I was then ready to stitch my peak on the machine. So then I took my peak to the machine and I stitched along the outer edge, making sure that I had got my notches all in place. Once I had stitched my peak, I then had the pleasure of flipping it out. So I took my buckram and I flipped it round to make sure that I had that very satisfying strong edge to my peak. I then gave that a iron and I took all my tailor tacks out for my buckram. So I'm going to show you next the pieces on the instructions. So we're going to do a little bit of stay stitching. We're going to stay stitch our peak and also our piece 1. So I took my peak back to the machine and stay stitched so that I was encasing my buckram between the 2 pieces of gingham fabric. And there's my stay stitching. I then made sure that all of my tailor tacks were out and then I stay stitched piece 1 on the machine, ready for the next part of my hat. So let's check our instructions. We're going to take the hat, peak and the hat piece 1 and stitch them together. So for this piece, make sure that your notch is in the centre front and it's at the top. We then stitch these pieces together using the tailor tacks at the closest at the bottom. We then pressed our cap out and we pressed our piece 5, which was our ties. We then got some scissors in them and made sure we had a very strong point there. We then took these and we pinned them to piece 1 on the inside. So I'm showing you here the left and the right that were all ready to then be stitched. So let's check in on our pattern. We're now on the last column here of our pattern. We're going to stitch our ties in at the back and then we're going to prepare our lining to stitch it on. So here is our lining. As you can see, I've got my tailor tack at the top and I'm pressing it in. So I've actually pressed in the top and the bottom so that I've got some nice strong lines here so I can stitch along these two. Now this is where your tailor tacks and your notches are absolutely essential. I've actually highlighted these with a water-soluble dressmaking pen. So the 2 at the bottom and the 2 at the top here are noted. So the 2 at the bottom on the lining will go inwards and they will then attach to the cap bottom. I'm going to grade out and then I am ready then to pin. So I'm pinning those 2 at the bottom and I'm going to then stitch along this line. I took my cap back to the machine, I stitched this and then I graded it and then I understitched it. So I had a beautiful line of stitching on my cap. And then we are ready to put piece 3, which is the back, in. So we've got our gingham fabric piece, which we're going to attach through first, and then we're going to bag our cap with the lining. So here I am attaching the back, which is matching the tailor tacks first, and then pinning all the way round. Now make sure on this bit that you pin also right to the bottom where your elastic is and also where the ties are too. And that will make sure that when you take it back to the machine, it will be one easy bit of stitching to do. So let's check in on our instructions one final time. We're just going to the area on the diagram where we're going to bag. So we've got our piece 3 all pinned and we've just got that bit which I'm just going to show you in a little bit more detail. We're going to take those back pieces there where the ties are and that elastic and we're going to make sure they're pinned and we're just going to stretch the pieces round and matching our notches as we go. So I'm going to take that to the machine and I am going to get that sewn. Now I found this easy to stitch halfway up and round the top of my pieces and then flip it and then go the other way instead of stitching in one piece. It's a little bit like stitching a sleeve. So if you're an experienced beginner and you're used to stitching sleeves, this is a little bit like stitching a sleeve. So here we are, we're already stitched, and then we need to make our bag or our burrito. So the next thing I'm going to do is I've got my cap and it's all laid right sides out. I'm going to flip it inside out, and that's by rolling in my buckram cap. Don't worry, it will press out again. And I'm going to take those pieces of lining, which is our final seam to do, and I'm going to pin those together. So for me, I'm going to pin it so that I've got a little gap so I can bag out my cap or use the burrito technique and flip it out. So it's pinned both ways, and then I'm ready to stitch. So then I'm going to take my cap to the machine and I'm going to stitch it down both sides to ensure that I still do have that gap, so that once it's stitched, I can flip it out. So make sure on this side that both of the sides where you've got your elastic to your ties is stitched and is equal. So you might need to just tweak this and just keep on checking those tailor tacks and those notches to make sure that they're all in the right place. And then you'll be ready to flip your cap out and do the bagging. And we're now on to the last process of our cap. So we're going to take our cap and we're going to bag it out or flip out our burrito. So I've got a 3-inch gap here in the stitching, and as you can see, I've stitched one side of that 3-inch gap and also on the other side. So we're going to flip out our cap now. And don't worry about the need for a press. We can press out that buckram as we flip it out, so that will not be a problem. And the piece that we need to hand stitch is just the seam where we have flipped out the cap. So we'll just hand stitch that together and then we'll give it all a good press. I would press this out either on a tailor's ham or on the edge of an ironing board, so you've got a really great press on those pieces 1 and 3 and also those ties at the back. And here is my cap, and I really love the fit on this. I really like that vintage feel on that peak. You can hack this if you wanted to make the peak a little smaller, but I really like this. I like those ties and I like the fit that the ties give my cap, and it's such a comfortable fit. And that's it, and that's today's sew along. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I particularly like making this cap, and I think I'm going to be making this again and again for all members of the family because it will make such a great gift all the year round. So before I go, I want to ask, have you joined the Minerva Craft Club? It gives you 10% off all of your orders for a minimal charge. And 10% really, if you add that up across the year, really does add up. There's more details in the description box below. Why not join today? So thank you for watching today's video. What kind of fabric would you make your cap in? And what other of the 4 designs on this pattern would you give a go? Thank you so much. Do comment below and I'll see you in the next video.